Hi, this is Mike with the stretched 1978 Land Cruiser on 1-ton axles. This video covers the 4-year build history starting in 2021. And first is a quick look back at the history of the Land Cruiser. This was our family car growing up, and we took it all over Colorado. By 1992, with 190,000 miles on the odometer, it was parked due to a bad transmission, a worn-out differential, and other mechanical and electrical issues. I bought it right here in 1995 from my dad, and I spent about a year repairing it. It was my first car, and I drove it everywhere and nearly stock until about 1999 when I had enough money to make a few modifications. Here we are, we're traveling through the San Juan Mountains through the snow season, the end of the snow season in July. I finally started to venture out into Moab and explored quite a bit of Utah, and that's when I decided it was time to do some major modifications to it. This is the first time that we'd ever pulled an engine out of a vehicle, so we were pretty proud of ourselves and somewhat surprised too. I stuffed a small block Chevy in there with an SM465 transmission, and then the stock transfer case, stock gears, a Alcan swing over lift, and some other modifications to it. And I pretty much drove it like that for about another 20 years until I took it apart in 2021. The only thing I broke was the transfer case, and that was after about 100 trips to Moab, not being too light on it either. I found another transfer case used, I just threw it in, and away I went. But it never was exactly the way I wanted it, and finally in 2021 I was able to pull it apart and make the way I wanted to make it. So the first thing I did is I started to take the engine out. I'd sold that to a person locally, and in about 2 weeks it was completely disassembled. It came apart so quick it led to the illusion that I could get it back together maybe in a year or two. Well, it took a little bit longer than that. I first started with a 6.2 liter LS that was pulled out of a salvage 2008 Escalade, and I put an NV4500 5-speed transmission behind that with an Atlas 4-speed transfer case. I pulled the wiring harness, the factory wiring harness off of the Escalade, and I started to cut it back and splice and build it the way I needed it for the Land Cruiser. And I put my own fuse box in there and started tying up the wires to make it fit. You can see here we're putting in the air intake, got the brake, master cylinder. That was off of a GM 1-ton vehicle. And I'm making some brackets to put the proportioning valve on there, and here's a bulkhead bracket for the brake lines. That's my wooden replica for the radiator I had made by DeWitt's Radiator. I cut the original brackets and bolted them to the radiator and welded in some pieces around it. And then I put the condenser on there for the air conditioning. It fit really nice. It has two 10 or 11 inch ball fans that are variable speed, brushless, and it keeps that thing cool even at 100 degrees outside. I'm doing some miscellaneous brackets here for the windshield washer fluid. Also, that later will serve as my mount for the air compressor. And I'm taking the piggyback reservoir off because I cooked the power steering fluid on my first test run. So I put a remote res in there and a cooler. And these are just shots of the exhaust. The chassis and suspension probably took me about 2 years to build. I first started with cutting the chassis in half and lengthening it by 14 inches. And then I started working on capping the frame all the way front to back, welded and plated. And then from there, I was able to build some brackets. Now, some of these brackets I've actually since cut off, like that transmission cross member. It's been cut off, and I've since rebuilt that. Don't weld your cross member to the frame. Here I am making my notch for the rear suspension. I probably wouldn't do this again. I probably would package my coil springs a little bit differently, but I did that because I was trying to get my sway bar in on the back side there. Sway bar would have worked fine from the front side though. I built all of these brackets myself out of my garage using the Swag Off-Road press brake. Man, that thing looks really good. I highly recommend it. You can see here that I'm starting to package in my PSC hydraulic assist steering, and that works really, really well. I'm really happy with that. I'm locking in place the air bumps. I waited about 18 months for those coilover shocks and another 9 months for the air bumps due to supply chain issues. I do not recommend to lock your suspension in place without those items. I used basically steel tube, and it worked out okay, but it wasn't the most ideal. Here I made some brackets for the shock reservoirs for the back, and you can see them packaged in the wheel well there. Things are starting to get pretty exciting at this point. I still didn't have the tub. I was waiting for that to get finished, but while I was waiting, I started to make some front fenders out of tube. And no, I didn't buy a kit. This is homemade from steel tube, and just took some flat 18 gauge or 16 gauge. I don't remember what I used, but I took some sheet metal and laid it on the top and welded it around, smoothed it out. And then I made some inner fender pieces to sort of finish it off so it looked like a complete truck when it was done. I had to trim my front grille so the tires would clear, so I just took the little edge out of there and put a piece of flat steel in to smooth that out. And then, man, I did this. I cut those rockers out when I was 16 years old, and I always wish I hadn't done that, so I fixed it. Finally, the tub arrived. I got the tub from Aqualoo out of Canada, and man, those people are really, really good. They stretched it 14 inches for me. We didn't use the one off the shelf. They actually built a custom tub for me so we could configure the fenders to fit the 40-inch tires. Their tub wasn't going to work. I was going to have to cut out the back fender and stick the tire further out the back, so we made the fenders extend further forward than they make their one off the shelf. I've applied 2 layers each of lizard skin sound control and the ceramic insulation to both the top and the bottom of the tub. And then on top I put the Raptor liner, and on bottom I put lizard skin top coat just to hold that stuff in. It did a pretty good job. It's definitely quieter. I will be adding some additional sound deadening to it and some heat shield underneath later on. It still gets pretty hot inside the truck, but it's a world of difference from before. Here I am making the transmission cover, the one that came with the tub from Aqualoo. Didn't quite work out. It wasn't long enough. Here you can see the Raptor liner in place. Boy, it sure did look slick right after I painted it. Once it was painted, I started to pull the pieces out from hibernation and dusted them off, started putting them back in. I really didn't restore many of the original pieces here. I just kind of painted them, put them back in. Brand new dash cover and a new gauge from Dakota Digital. And once all that was together, I started building some small pieces like the center console here. This is the first time that I backed it out of my garage in 4 years. I didn't have the radiator in it yet. I was just running a garden hose through the engine. I had a local company build the fuel cell for me, and I created this replica here. I first started with cardboard, then I moved over to styrofoam because it was a little less forgiving, which I needed because I was in a pretty tight space in there and I needed the dimensions to be pretty specific. I pulled the hardtop out of hibernation and cut the sides just to mock it in place so we could see where to put our bars for the cage. I didn't finish the top of this time. I will do that. I'll pick that back up at a later time and get that on there. I do want to use the top in the winter months. DJ came over and we used his CAD system to make measurements for where the tubes go around the windshield and around the top loop. And we used a Rogue Fab tube bender. It was really slick. It turned out nice. The rest of this video is pretty explanatory. I'm going to finish off the rear tire carrier, get some sliders on it, and just do some finishing touches inside. Alright, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Be sure to watch all the way through the end because I put some clips of me driving it up some pretty fun obstacles here in Colorado. Thanks again.